Okay, so welcome to today's ELN webinar, everyone. The session on today is all about the delivery through a virtual classroom. Just some intros before we start. The actual session itself, we're going to be covering over 30 minutes, various topics to do with the virtual delivery, including the teaching, learning and assessment cycle, virtual learning platforms, all about online pedagogy and assessment principles, preparation and delivery, how to engage your learners, virtual tools and resources, accessibility, and finally, consolidation of your learning and assessment. Beyond those 30 minutes, we will go into a question and answer session where you can, as we go along, by all means, you can type your questions into the chat box, and Sarah will keep these to the end. And then we can, again, obviously take any questions when we get to that stage as well. This is me, okay, Mark. I'm ELN's training manager, and I've been sort of within education training for quite a few years. It's taken me all around the world in terms of locations in the Middle East, Africa, Asia, and obviously as well within the UK. Obviously, apart from the delivery, I'll also do quite a lot of assessment and external quality assurance as well. Yeah. And then just a couple of ground rules. I'm sure there won't be any issues, but again, just please keep writing your questions within the chat area. I'm sure it won't happen at all, but anybody causing disturbance will be removed from the session. And as I mentioned, questions we'll deal with at the very end. So without further ado, delivery through a virtual classroom. Okay, well since COVID-19 has initially kicked off back in February, March time, online learning has become a lot more prominent in terms of its use through the UK and wider abroad. Okay, it's rapidly emerging as the new, well, one of the new norms within teaching, and this is from anywhere from schools to locations where we teach skills training. More people than ever learn now through online courses. Okay, so even when teaching is primarily face-to-face, online tools and interactions have become a key part of the actual learning experience. So, but teaching online is different. Okay, it certainly is. If anyone has any experience of online teaching already, it certainly is different. And if you do work in education or training at any level, you need to develop those skills and understanding in order to make the right decisions and make the most of the opportunities to overcome common challenges. Whether teaching face-to-face or online, the teaching, learning and assessment cycle should still be followed. I mean, when you think about it, the only real difference between the two settings are environment. That's really the only difference. Within the face-to-face environment, yeah, the cycle works as normal. And really, within the virtual environment, you should be trying to mimic, simulate that cycle as close as possible, right through from preparation, right through to delivery and evaluation. And what I'll chat about now again is just a few pointers in terms of what considerations you would need to think about prior and during delivery of teaching. Kicking off with identifying needs. Okay, so these can be more difficult, I think, to determine when you're planning online sessions. And then you're going to come up against issues such as things perhaps you never even thought of yet. You know, student learner ownership of actual IT computer devices, and even the skills associated with actual computer use. These are just two examples other than the usual identifying needs scenarios that you would normally do through diagnostic and initial assessments. Okay, so again, think outside the box is a bit of a horrible expression, but again, take into consideration being online and what other issues and difficulties you need to sort of identify before you actually plan. Moving on to planning. Now, we all know planning involves the use of schemes of work, session plans, and resources to ensure you cover the requirements of the actual program you're teaching. However, other considerations in terms of planning changes to lesson durations, and obviously other risks involved with the online delivery of programs, qualifications, whatever you may be delivering. Okay, so your session plans, although they may work within the face-to-face environment, within the actual virtual environment, the general rule of thumb is don't plan to cover as much as you would do if you were face-to-face. So there's an adaptation through the way to your lesson plan and probably your schemes of work as well. So again, small considerations such as session plans need to be included. Moving on to the next stage, we've got the facilitation of learning. Okay, and again, online teaching and learning will need a variety of approaches. Okay, not only learning approaches, but activities and resources to keep people motivated, engaged, and obviously to ensure communication is an ongoing process. And this is where it gets challenging. Engagement virtually can, and we'll talk more about this later on, but it can be one of those things that if you don't put proper preparation into it and you complete your session, you may sort of feel drained yourself because you probably know or think that you haven't achieved your aim at the end. So this part of the cycle obviously ties in well with the planning side, and you can see how the planning fits in with all steps. In terms of the assessment of learners, obviously through the normal cycle, you're checking that your learners have gained the necessary skills, knowledge, and understanding during all stages of your session. Those methods and techniques you use to assess will ensure the validity, the accuracy, the currency, sufficiency, and reliability of assessment is ensured within your subject specialism. Okay, so the last thing you want to be doing through your teaching and assessment is losing the VACSR. And finally, we move on to the evaluation of learning or evaluating learning. And here's where you're obtaining feedback from others and your learners. Subtle differences here is you're reflecting on your own performance within the virtual environment and how you're going to make improvements, how you're going to get feedback from your learners in terms of your performance. Most of these you will use as normal, face-to-face, but obviously being online, you're going to have to use some form of perhaps digital equipment or surveys, questionnaires, etc., that you can source online, preferably free, which you can use to gain that valuable feedback from your session. And obviously, vitally important nowadays is ensuring that records, communication with others is accurately reflected in terms of GDPR. Okay, because again, you may be working with a lot of data, and again, that has to be considered on an ongoing basis. So, kicking off, and again, if you're sort of given maybe perhaps a fastball in terms of delivering virtually, okay, and you really haven't got a lot of time to plan, ask yourself the following questions. Okay, what content can be made available straight away? Okay, so this is where perhaps you have got content already in use through perhaps PowerPoint, which you can adapt into a virtual learning environment. How can you substitute your theory and your practical sessions and assessments? So how can you sufficiently and adequately sort of map across what you do in the classroom to the virtual environment? Yeah, you're going to lose certain elements as common sense, but how can you sort of try and simulate the same theory and practical elements within a virtual environment the best you can? Of course, it's not going to be 100% perfect. It's not going to be the same. But again, these are sort of things of how you can think about initially. How can you keep your learners engaged with the actual learning? Again, this is vital. Okay, vital. Your content can be, reams and reams of fantastic slides full of text. But if you haven't got the learner's attention and they're not learning, okay, they're not being engaged and communicating, you may find yourself wasting your time in terms of trying to achieve your objectives. So again, this is one that needs a lot of planning and thought. And obviously, what goes hand in hand with engagement is obviously that communication factor. How can you communicate with your learners to provide them with feedback? So not only will you can communicate during the actual session, but perhaps through completing assessment, you may have to provide feedback to the learners to ensure they're still receiving feedback, whether it is assessment or other, an effective and accurate way. And again, feedback is supposed to be, and it's very understanding, beneficial to the learner and shows them exactly where they can make improvements as well. So that feedback is not just lip service, it needs to be effective in its content as well, and how you deliver that content. Virtual learning platforms. Now, there are lots of virtual learning platforms out there. Some you need to pay for, and some are free up to obviously certain standards. Now, obviously at ELN, we do not sort of affiliate ourselves against any particular learning platform, okay? All this session is really doing is giving you sort of an overview of other learning platforms that are out there. And perhaps at the end during the questions, you can ask maybe perhaps the benefits or limitations of each of these, through experience, which ones are preferred. But again, hasten to add, we're not in any connection with any of these platforms. So the first one is the Microsoft Teams. Okay, and again, this was one along with Zoom, which was very popular at the beginning of COVID, when the whole idea of virtual online teaching sort of came into fore. Okay, and again, it's one that you may be familiar with, but it can be useful in terms of the various tools that it gives. But again, you must ensure, obviously, that anybody using the MS Teams is competent in its use. That is why we sort of recommend that try and use a virtual platform that you're already familiar with. If you've already been using one, perhaps not as much as you did pre-COVID, but you're confident in using a particular platform, why not continue to use that platform and gradually perhaps change into what you perceive to be a better platform with more features. So sort of you can make that sort of change, that transition easier, as opposed to giving yourself a whole challenge of learning a new platform, and indeed your learners having to learn a new platform as well. GoToMeeting, again, GoToMeeting was one of the companies, organizations that sort of came in more into the fore pre-COVID, and what they did as well is they also included an additional package to GoToMeeting was GoToWebinar. Again, it's a separate billing service, but again, a separate service entirely. But again, that's another option. Again, it's much the same principles as MS Teams, as you would imagine. And bearing in mind, your virtual platforms need to be able to connect you to the entire class at once, okay, to provide that engagement and effective online instruction. So again, it does pay to have some research done on how you would actually engage with your learners and how hard it is for you to actually master the platform. And again, as importantly, how easy it is for the learners to master the platform. I know other moving parts in there, such as learner ages, abilities, availability of IT equipment, etc., etc. Next one is Google Classrooms. And probably you can actually include Google Meets with this as well, because again, there are two apps that Google offer that in Google Classrooms, certainly from my own experience with my own family, are getting used quite a lot within schools. And again, through chatting to my family, they are effective. But again, it really depends on the delivery style and the assessment style that you want to achieve within your particular teaching scenario, organization, whatever it may be. And finally, Zoom. which we're on today. Okay, I'm sure you're already aware of that, but just so I'll tell you again. Okay, so Zoom, you know, it has been probably by and large the most popular platform available and used. Not so much pre-COVID, but certainly during and current, it has taken off and is used quite a lot. Okay. Again, do your research in terms of which one would you prefer to use in terms of what goals we want to achieve, even thinking back to the teaching, learning and assessment cycle, and also take in considerations, again, the ability and needs of the learners you're actually delivering to. Do you really need a complicated platform, or something like Zoom, which is pretty easy to control and use as a presenter, as a learner? Is that the way you want to include? And again, class sizes have got a lot to do with it as well, because most of the platforms nowadays have got certain limitations in terms of time available to actually deliver your sessions, the amount of learners you can have online, but their package is available. But again, please look around. So, online pedagogy and assessment principles. Okay, so what is pedagogy? Pedagogy is the method and practice of teaching. Simple as that. That's all it means. Obviously, more so to do with teaching academic subjects, such within schools, further education, colleges, etc. Okay. Pedagogy is how you deliver your teaching, and really the best way to sort of differentiate the whole pedagogy theme in terms of how you deliver, how you assess, is by following the following principles. Okay. So basically the basis of your teaching remains exactly the same. Okay. Careful planning, okay, remains central to successful teaching. Okay, so how you plan something will ultimately determine how you deliver, and ultimately, you know, how effective you are on that delivery. And that's saying both face-to-face and online. So really, there's no need to change how you teach and the method you teach from face-to-face to be effective online. Online pedagogy is where you want to remember you need to emphasize and focus on the actual student, learner, whatever it may be. Okay, they need to be the center of attention. They need to be the one that the learning, assessment and engagement is focused on. Okay, so how you deliver something, yeah, will change online, but generally the principles of how you do business face-to-face will not change between the two environments. The forms of teaching interaction may change. Okay, so even on the online classroom, it removes certain forms of face-to-face contact. Okay, so obviously that's going to happen. Okay, it creates opportunities for you to develop new ways to interact with your learners. Again, all new experiences, all good. If it's well planned and you're intentional in its use, online technologies can encourage and facilitate more interaction with and among learners. So for example, as described below, once I show you in a second or two, you can increase learner engagement by identifying learners' questions about the material. You can also use polls on interactive technologies to get a sense of learners' experience, comprehension, and reactions, i.e. you're reading the room and trying to ascertain what the reactions are from learners within your virtual environment. Other methods, having small grouped conversations and breakout rooms, and we'll discuss more about it later on. But again, these are some examples of how interactions need to sort of be developed, changed, and new ones found. And again, this won't come perhaps naturally straight away. You may have to go through a series of sessions, see what works, see what doesn't work with your particular group composition, and then adapt in future planning and delivery. focus on your pedagogy and not the actual medium again. So getting right back to the start, how you deliver and teach. That's the principles you want to bear in mind. Okay, so not ignore obviously the fact you're doing it online, but use the principles which are effective online, such as through video, simulation, text. Okay, they're obviously more effective when you're teaching face-to-face. However, you need to sort of try and simulate those within that virtual environment. When you're teaching online, you'll need to be seen as present. Okay, you need to have a physical presence. This doesn't mean being available all the time. Okay, so try to be visible and ensure that two-way channels are also available for both discussion and feedback. The learners need to see you are there, you are a real person. Again, not all the time, but certainly it does reassure, and it means as well you can actually can actually see and look at each other and make sure everyone's doing what they should be doing. Set classroom norms and boundaries. Again, so it's quite important, thinking back to the very essence of teaching and why we teach, and you know, the responsibilities and being professional, etc. This is sort of taking you right back there in terms of ensuring that learners know what the expectations are for when they're completing sessions. You know, really your vocabulary, your grammar in which you, and your communication with learners needs to be the same as you would do within the face-to-face environment. Boundaries, again, they need to be specified to start, making sure the learners under no doubt whatsoever that they are in a proper, structured learning environment, as you would do face-to-face. So, preparation and delivery of your session. So, where possible, break down content into smaller chunks in your initial design. Okay, these chunks, you know, perhaps advice maybe no more than 15 to 20 minutes at any one time before perhaps there's an activity or a pause for reflection or even a break. It's particularly relevant if you're using video a lot, okay, and presentation slides. Because what can happen is if people can start getting mesmerized looking at slides, as probably maybe some of you are now at the minute, but sort of think about those sort of smaller manageable chunks and then have some form of activity before cracking on with the next manageable smaller chunk. So with that in mind, then your lesson plan should be still detailed, obviously, okay, because you still need to know what you're going to be doing. But obviously it'll also include activities which are detailed in terms of your assessment activities, your learner activities, perhaps focus on things like collaborative work, group discussions, that type of thing. Before you actually deliver, make sure you practice, okay, and one that most people tend to forget or just maybe haven't allowed time for, but practice at least once in advance. And here you're going to rehearse using things such as screen share and switching among the windows you intend to display during your actual session. If you're teaching solo, practice clicking between the platforms, presentation mode, for example, and any slides or presentation materials you have, and any other technologies like whiteboarding tools, polls, or videos, okay, all vitally important. It all sounds really easy until you start delivering your session, and just one small setting within even your platform or within your actual PowerPoint, for example, will not allow you to have that smooth transition between your materials. And again, apart from practice, it may take you a couple of sessions beyond that to start getting things 100% correct. Make your transitions explicit, okay? So be sure to provide clean, well-defined transitions between your activities or discussion topics, okay? So this can maybe start off with a nice, crisp introduction and objectives and your learning objectives, and telling the class exactly what you are going to do. And then your actual content itself, when you're preparing and completing the actual delivery, that, you know, people are sure what section they're moving on to and where they are within the presentation. Nobody likes not knowing where they are within a presentation. So it's sort of nice to make sure that your transitions, no matter what you're using, are well defined and they make sense, obviously, as well. What's your pace? Okay, so pace in terms of, in regard to your timing, and keep an eye as well on students' comprehension and engagement. All right, so again, if people are being lost amongst all the information being through it, and again, it may be an occasion to throw on an activity or a break, or perhaps you're rushing through it, or even you may be going too slow. Again, things to consider. Some research actually states that learners absorb and process information at the same rate as they would do face-to-face. However, others have found that they can only cover, and I mentioned this at the very start, only 1/2 to 2/3 as much material as they would do face-to-face. So again, perhaps that maybe a lot depends on actual material you're trying to deliver and how effective it is online. Either way, it's something you're going to have to plan and trial with. Obviously online, keeping that engagement, as we keep chatting about, is key, and checking in with your learners frequently, as you would do normally, is key as well, and making sure they're following the material and that engagement is kept. Make sure, again, you configure your platform settings and preferences. So again, quite important, again, depending on what platform you use and what actual operating system you're using with your computer. Make sure that you've got a correct settings on in terms of screen sharing, permissions, noises, playing the videos. If you want students to screen share their screens, make sure that's prepared for you, know how to do it. And also a key one, especially when teaching, most of webinars probably, but again, it will be in the classroom as well, is pre-mute everyone and telling them the reason behind it. You know, the reason you're pre-muting is because you want to deliver a certain amount of material before questions are actually asked to them. Keep your learners in front of you. Okay, so again, some platforms vary, but almost all follow the same principle. Try and keep the platform gallery straight in front of you so you can see all the learners. Obviously, it depends how many you have, and your screen, the computer's capability will come into that as well. So yeah, so have visual where you can. We mentioned this before. Being visible is quite important when you're teaching. It helps the learners remain engaged, okay, because they can physically see, not just a screen. And if they can see your face as you present your material, then again, hopefully that will increase that communication effectiveness. Make sure when you're setting up your devices, even when you're screen share, that students can see your face at the same time as material is being displayed. So make sure everything's synced together when you deliver the actual session. So engagement, I know we've talked a little about this before, but just to sort of go over it again, platform tools. You know, this is one way certainly of using tools within the actual platforms to hopefully use with your learners. Tools, I mean here, such as screen share, breakout rooms. And what a breakout room would be is perhaps if you were having a number of syndicates within a particular class, you would perhaps group them off, and they would go into each separate rooms, complete a discussion by themselves, and then come back out. So breakout rooms. Questions and discussions via just a normal chat mode on the actual interface. Inviting questions and answers, and this is where some platforms have got, you know, they use a raising hand scenario where they've got an option to raise their hand, and the presenter can, or teacher can actually see the hand being raised and can perhaps stop at a particular point within the delivery and answer a particular question when it's convenient, of course. Invited questions and answers are fine, okay, but it does need to be controlled as well, and using the raised hand method is quite a good way to do that. encourage learners to use chat to participate. Okay, so chat can draw on students who have great ideas to contribute to the actual session, but may remain quiet during the actual discussions or debates. Some people just naturally inclined that way to remain quiet during those times. Reminding your learners that, you know, quantity and the quality of chat comments are, you know, important, so it can make an effective contribution. You can perhaps mention things like, if you take part within the discussion, it will contribute to the overall grade within this particular session of your participation. So it's not blackmail at all, but what it's doing, you're encouraging people to take part by the very, you know, because there's nothing worse than planning your activities, chatting about your delivery, your content, sorry, and then asking for some discussion and nobody wants to speak. Whereas if learners think that it actually gives them the opportunity to get a good grade, get a good mark from a particular class, and if they do start a conversation or take part in the conversation, that they can do it, well, then they might well find that you might have a lot of people doing that. One-to-one or small group meetings, and again, we briefly mentioned this just in tools. Okay, so these can be held on some platforms, others don't. So please, again, do your research. And within these rooms, it's obviously important to maintain the same norms as you would do face-to-face as best you can in terms of distractions and behavior. Breaks, stretch times. Okay, so consider and encourage learners to stretch perhaps every 20 to 30 minutes for 30 seconds. You're sitting perhaps in your chair, looking at your laptop, looking at a tablet, nothing wrong at all, having that stretch break, 20, 30 seconds, up to get, do a bit of a stretch, and then sit back down again and continue on with the learning. You will find it doesn't sound like much, but it can be beneficial for that communication and interaction. And obviously, you know, making sure that that's actually taking in what you're actually teaching. And then finally, another idea for engagement would be the gamification. Now, gamification is varied in terms of what you can do. Okay, so really what it is basically within the educational setting is a method of motivating students to learn by using perhaps video game design and game elements in the learning environment, in the virtual learning environment. And these can you know, be such things such as learning badges that they can earn. They can downloadable learning badges. Obviously, as I mentioned there, the goal is to keep motivated, maximize enjoyment and engagement. But again, you may have to do some thinking as what the best gamification will work with your particular set of learners, given the particular subject that you're teaching. So, some virtual learning tools and resources. Let's look at the first one, and it is PowerPoint. Okay. PowerPoint can be used obviously within the face-to-face environment. In fact, it's quite popular with other similar platforms as well. But what it can do, okay, is give you that basis for your overall session. Never mind the activities in between. This is sort of can be your base grounding to include videos, to include text, to include ideas for discussion, for prompts. So again, PowerPoint as a tool outside the virtual learning platform is excellent, okay? And then obviously it's quite workable with all the platforms through screen sharing. Screen sharing, again, every learning platform has got the ability to screen share, and this is vital, obviously. And again, I know it sounds like common sense, but it really is vital in terms of being able to screen share, because that's really how you're going to deliver the actual content of the session. We mentioned before, invited question and answers through raised hands. Okay, so again, this is on some platforms, okay, but certainly there's other ways and means on which you can invite questions and answers. You don't have to have the raised hands option within the actual platform for this to be effective. breakout rooms, we discussed. Whiteboard is quite popular within some virtual platforms, and this is where you can freehand writing. You can obviously do other bits and pieces. Again, very much depends whether you need it or not within a particular subject you're teaching. Obviously, your main idea is to keep it simple at the start, and don't give yourself too many different tools to use to either clutter or confuse and another, break up actual delivery of a session itself. Recording, again, this is quite an important one. Recording is very important when you want to ensure that the session can be used in future again for perhaps learners who weren't able to attend the original version. And again, it's quite good for your own self-evaluation as well. Video sharing, again, another obvious one, but these are videos perhaps that you can embed onto platforms such as PowerPoint, and then obviously place onto your virtual platform. And again, video sharing can be used by all teachers as long, obviously, as the content is reliable in terms of its content is from a reliable source, and the content is suitable for the group that you're teaching as well. And app collaboration through apps such as Kahoot and Quiz, okay, or a Nearpod, as you see there as well. So that type of collaboration, again, some are free, some you need to pay for, but these you can integrate with the learning platforms and your teaching environment. So again, a very good tool to use, more so probably for assessment, but can be used for various activities. So accessibility is quite important, obviously. Okay, so students have a range of abilities. Okay, not everyone will disclose what challenges they have. Okay, so your program of learning needs to ensure that you cater for your full range of learning needs from all your students and completed within the planning phase. Okay. However, what is useful is if you already sort of aim off during your planning. If no one's, students don't have to tell you necessarily that they have any particular learning needs. Okay. So rather than have an ineffective session for some of your learners who just haven't told you, or perhaps it's not within your organization's remit, you haven't got time to complete that initial diagnostic or initial assessment, you can help yourself by doing a couple of adaptations to your face-to-face teaching. For example, text. Text is universal. Okay. So if you send images, for example, to learners, make sure you include text descriptions so that when they're using technologies, they can follow along. Okay, so not just actual text, but make sure you cater for all learning styles and learning abilities by using text with pictures, which perhaps will fill in the gaps, any teaching or any instructions you try and deliver. Some students need additional processing time. Okay, so don't expect everyone to understand everything being told at the same time. Okay, it doesn't happen. Okay, so beyond the actual delivery of a session, that recording that you've done, share the transcripts, share the recording, share the images for learners to download and examine afterwards. Okay, so perhaps by then it may sort of make more sense to them and begin to understand. Again, this is not just virtual learning. This is very much the same within the face-to-face environment as well. And finally, select accessible resources. So obviously, goes without saying, resources need to be accessible by all, not just yourself, a teacher, but if you're pointing your learners towards resources to develop them within their actual learning, depends what subject you're teaching, that those resources you're signposting them to, they can access themselves. So how do we consolidate and assess learning? Okay, so the traditional assessment environment is difficult to do, obviously, whilst you're online. Okay, and again, this very much depends on the nature of the training learning environment you usually operate in. So continual assessment becomes a key way to gauge how well your learners are actually doing. Okay, so in order to keep a record of learner progress, you need to sort of include assessment criteria of some sort within your actual learning program. Now, 99% of the time you're going to have this already, but you may have to adapt it, thinking back to your adaptations of your actual session plans and what you can fit in a session. Here, assessment criteria is key, so you're making sure you're keeping track of what you're covering within perhaps a syllabus, and more so that you're assessing against proper assessment and grading criteria. Obviously, verbal questioning is quite effective, okay, both in a formative and summative sense. Okay, verbal questioning is needed within actual teaching environment because it certainly is a good way of ascertaining the understanding of your learners. Written questions, again, can be used quite easily remote. Okay, so learners can, if given extension activities within a teaching session, can send you their answer via Word, for example, by email. And then you can complete and use tools on the Word, for example, such as using track changes, where you'd make comments, suggest revisions, and obviously then the learners can then reciprocate and complete that feedback. Video observation, and again, this can be used online in assessment if primarily what you're assessing is going to be practical and perhaps even simulated skills, work-based competency, that type of idea. But again, this you know, I say video observation, it does take planning as well, pre-planning on your assessment methods and techniques being used and what you're overall trying to achieve, and does it meet the actual assessment criteria that you're trying to achieve. As I mentioned before, quizzes such as using Kahoot, Nearpod, or Quiz. Okay, again, all very useful and actually fun as well, because it does increase the interaction between you and the learners and gets them actually using other devices. Again, I hasten to add, if they have availability of other devices. So again, that's come within your own individual planning process. The following slide, as you can see there, is just a couple of screenshots from Quiz. Okay, it's one of the interactive apps that you can download onto your smartphone. What way you could use this, for example, you could register online as an actual teacher, devise your own quizzes, devise your own activities, and then obviously include them as part of your actual teaching session or your assessment. And what people can do, or your learners can do, is actually access these apps via their phone. Okay, so basically you get the results coming in live and they can see it on your screen. Can be confidential, or can be obviously can be group open. So yeah, very, very good. Kahoot is similar, okay, because again, you can design your own quizzes. There's some pre-programmed quizzes, but again, as all apps, as we all know ourselves, be careful in terms of what your aspirations are and what you need it for, because there are charges involved when you start going into actually the design of your own tests and assessments. There's quite a lot out there you can perhaps get in terms of resources without actually having to pay. Okay, so have a look around, do your research, and obviously use what suits you best. And the final one I mentioned earlier on was a Nearpod. And think about Nearpod again, it sort of delves more into, mentions class discussions and gamification, as you can see there, and quizzes. So again, there's a bit more to it. And again, they're worthwhile having a play around with, and again, seeing what suits you the best. Some legal considerations before we finish off. And again, you know, sort of need to consider some of these given the context of where and how you're teaching. And again, this is all familiar because it's exactly the same considerations and planning as you would do if you were completing it face-to-face. So quality, diversity, and inclusion, okay, so vitally important, as we all know. you need to understand your learners, okay? So right through from the planning process, right the way through the program of learning, okay? So it's up to you to ensure that you include, relevant teaching strategies and materials, which are obviously give equal opportunities to everyone who actually teach, and prove to everyone that you're diverse in your content, and you encourage equal opportunity and inclusion through everything you do, through teaching, through communication, through the assessment, getting different perspectives. And again, it is hard work because you need to involve everyone as best you can, okay? And again, one of the limitations of teaching online, as I mentioned before, was the fact that you can lose that sort of interaction if someone doesn't communicate. And that's where that more activities, more confirmation, more questions, so it does keep everybody's attention at a lot shorter period of time as you would normally do. Data protection, obviously very important, making sure you take steps to ensure that your actual learning platform complies with privacy laws in your particular country. And obviously that the information that you include within the platform is secure, and you're mitigated within your terms and conditions against any legal financial exposure. Okay, so again, not wanting to scare anybody off by any means, but that needs to be considered depending on what platform you're using. Within the GDPR, for example, it requires organizations, institutions to have at least one lawful purpose for processing personal data, and additional lawful purpose for processing special category data. So again, you need to have reasons for having data on your actual teaching. Most online learning models, if you want to teach online, you need to use a platform of sorts, okay? Most of these platforms, for anybody logging in, will require name, email of learners, yourself, the teacher. Where possible, what I would recommend is to use organizational emails. So they're sourced from the one organization and not personal emails, okay? Because again, that can open up a whole separate can of worms. And, and again, not wanting to scare anybody off, but if they're all from the same organization emails, when perhaps there's a lot less information held within those particular email addresses, i.e. there's no additional personal details held on there. Prior to doing this, say do your research and make sure you're mitigating against these risks. And again, in terms of safeguarding, make sure the content what you're using is appropriate and doesn't contain harmful material, because the last thing you want to do in your lesson is making sure this is exposed to people who shouldn't be exposed to. So again, make sure it's age appropriate and make sure it's relevant to actual teaching that you're doing. A couple of useful links for you. Okay. We can share these via email or actually on the chat box as well, but on the teacher toolkit, there's quite a lot of resources on there in terms of teacher and student resources. And you've also got the SET Foundation, Society for Education and Training. They've got some hints and tips on there about how to teach online as well. Thank you very much indeed for listening to today's presentation. What I will say is that the presentation is not the 101 of virtual teaching. Virtual teaching has, when you think about it, as a new thing to everyone, regardless of how many years people have been teaching within the classroom, suddenly to be exposed to the online teaching environment is a learning curve, without a doubt. And not only a learning curve for yourself, but also remember your learners as well. So don't beat yourself up, okay? Do your planning. You'll find you'll need to, complete a number of sessions before you, as I say, you start getting things the way you want them. But again, it's a learning experience, and it's one that you'll probably never forget. And after the whole COVID thing is finished, and we get back to a more normal way of life, you may find yourself, falling back into the virtual classrooms again at some stage to maybe give that additional interaction within the actual organizational environment. And obviously improves your skills as well. That's not beat about the bush. It will obviously develop you as a teacher by teaching online, because it is a different skill set. Although there are and is a lot of crossover, it certainly is a different skill set. And thank you very much for listening. And I think that's us on to the questions, Sarah.
Yep. Mark, can you see the questions in the Q&A section?
Yep. Just give me a second. Okay.
So let's
Hala, how you doing, Hala? I know Hala, Sarah from a student. So Hala, so what are your ways to engage students for dialogue more? What are ways to reduce the cause of cheating in exams? We went through the ways to engage for dialogue. What I would do there, Hala, I would make sure that I would include activities which bring out student engagement. So breakout rooms is excellent. And make the groups small, no more perhaps than 2 people, because again, what that does, it forces one of those 2 people to become a spokesman or spokesperson from the group to actually engage. And then what you can do for the second activity, perhaps, is change the spokespeople over. So again, it's just one idea for creating that engagement. Cheating in exams. Yeah, okay. Now, there are a number of platforms out there which completes Proctor is one I know of, which basically means that what Proctor does, Hala, it enables the learner to complete an assessment within a remote home environment. And what Proctor is someone sitting watching them at the other end of their webcam, and they've got eyes on, they've got permission from the user's computer, they've got eyes on the person completing the assessment. We've got eyes on all around, full 360. That's certainly one way when it comes to exams. I mean, certainly in terms of, without going to that sort of expense or bother, assessments on the virtual environment, you need to consider what type of assessment methods you're going to use and try and adapt the methods so, there's no there's no issues with authenticity. Only you and them would have the access to the assessment material, whether it's be through maybe a one-to-one online where you can ask verbal questions to the actual person. And the good thing about verbal questions and one-on-one would be they have no other options but to either tell you the answer or they don't know. The assignments, yes, certainly written assignments is different because the person has got the opportunity to perhaps get help or change the answer prior to sending to you. But yeah, probably by formative summative assessment, I would certainly look towards verbal, one-to-one perhaps. And then on down the line in terms of any sort of, exam assessment, you would need a more formal way of assessing, Just looking down the questions here.
I think this is it.
Yeah, I think Hala just put a couple. Yeah, okay. Hala, just looking at your last one there, I know absolutely no way at all, Hala, how to teach law. Okay, I'll leave that to the expert, which is obviously yourself. Again, it's probably really, at an educated guess, what I would say there, Hala, is basically, plan ahead and make sure your activities are in relation to what you're trying to get across in terms of your learning objectives. And that's really where your subject matter expertise will come in. Working with communities, you don't want to open your camera. Yeah, that's fine. That's fine. There's nothing to say that you can't. Okay, now interaction is quite good. Okay, if you do. But if you're sort of, perhaps completing a one-off session and you don't particularly want to be identified, that's no problem. you know, and there's no issue there whatsoever. Hala, do you have any more? I think that's basically it.
Yep, I think that's it.
Yeah.
We have.
Okay, thank you, Sarah.
Thank you
well,
so much, Mark.
listen, Hala, thank you very much for joining today's session. Okay, as you can see, you will receive an email in your inbox for attending this session today. And again, Hala, you know, as always, as I mentioned in my feedback to you, if you need to get in contact, asking any additional questions, just let me know, okay, and we can arrange a call. Okay. Sarah, anything? No, happy enough?
No, I think that's it from my end too.
Great stuff. Okay. Have a
Thank
nice
you so
weekend,
much,
everyone.
Mark.
Bye. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.